So let me tell you this story. It's about how this moment of just pure frustration with a totally standard survey led me to build a brand new product. And I did it in a single afternoon. This is the origin story of that product, and more importantly, how it turned into this interactive documentary where you get to call the shots.
All right, let's just dive right in. First, we'll talk about the engagement problem that started this whole thing. Then, the big aha moment about swiping that changed everything. We'll look at how I cobbled together a prototype in just one afternoon and the frankly shocking success that came next. But that success led to a huge dilemma, like 4 different roads I could take, and that's where you come in.
So this whole thing kicked off because of a totally different project. I was doing some user research, and I sent out a pretty standard Google form to a couple hundred people. And what I got back was, well, basically nothing. Crickets.
Yeah, after spending like 3 hours getting all the questions just right, I got a grand total of 12 responses. 12? That's a 6% response rate. And at first, it felt like a complete and total failure. But it turns out that failure was the spark for a really critical realization.
And this right here, this was the core insight, the light bulb moment. The problem wasn't that the users were lazy. The problem was that the experience I gave them was punishing. You know what I'm talking about, that endless wall of text, those little radio buttons. It feels like homework. It feels like a chore. And once you realize that a bad survey is basically a punishment, well, that changes everything.
So that got me thinking. What if answering questions felt less like a chore and more like a choice? What if it felt more like, swiping on Tinder? And just like that, the focus completely shifted. It wasn't about data collection anymore. It was about shaping the user's psychological experience.
And you can see that psychological shift perfectly right here. On the left, you've got the old way, the Google form. It's just a huge mental lift, right? It feels like work, and you're just passively scrolling down a list. But the swipe card on the right, it flips the whole script. The cognitive load is super low, it feels like an active, empowering choice, and you, the user, are in total control, making real progress with every single swipe.
This idea, this insight, it just felt way too powerful to just, write down in a notebook and forget about. And yeah, Tinder for surveys sounds a little bit silly, I get it. But I had to see if it worked. So I decided to build a prototype, a minimum viable product, an MVP, just to test that core idea. The goal wasn't to build a business. It was to answer one question. And I gave myself just one afternoon to do it.
The whole build was ridiculously simple. I mean, it literally started with a single file in React, app.js. I built a simple UI, basically a stack of cards, one for each question. Then I added the swipe physics to get that really satisfying drag and release feel. And here's the key. I shipped it with no backend at all.
And this is so important to understand about building an MVP. This thing was not a product. Let's be clear. It had no database, no user accounts. It wasn't hooked up to Firebase or Supabase. It didn't even store the answers people gave. Its one and only job was to find out, does the swipe mechanic actually get more responses? That's it.
So I pushed this super simple, bare-bones prototype out to a new group of users. And then I just had to wait and see if my whole hypothesis was right or if I just wasted an afternoon. The results were, they were just staggering. Remember those 12 sad little responses from the Google form? The swipe survey got 163. 163. That's more than a 10 times improvement. This wasn't just a little bit better. It was like we were in a completely different universe of engagement. That was the moment. Looking at that data, it was just undeniable. This wasn't some silly gimmick. It was a real, fundamental breakthrough in getting people to engage. The core idea was totally validated. But with that validation came a much bigger, much more complicated problem. So now what? Okay, so the concept works. Great. But now the real question popped up. What do I actually build next? The whole project was at this massive crossroads with 4 very different but all totally valid directions I could go. And each choice would completely change what this thing would become. So here are the 4 paths I was staring at. Option A, go deep on the question engine. Add all sorts of complex logic, branching, make it a real pro tool. Option B, focus on a design mode. Make it gorgeous and customizable so people would share it and it would go viral. Option C, build out the backend. Make it rock solid, scalable with serious data analytics. Or Option D, just forget all the features and go find a real paying customer right now and let what they need drive the whole roadmap. So which path did I choose? Well,
This is where the story takes a really weird turn. I decided not to choose. Not alone, anyway. Instead, I decided to turn this very decision into the core mechanic of this whole documentary series.
I decided to build this whole project as an interactive documentary. It's a format where you, the audience, don't just sit back and watch the story of a product being built. Nope. Through your votes, you actively direct it. The path that gets the most votes is the path I actually build next, and that whole process becomes the very next episode. And that right there brings us to the heart of this entire experiment. Sure, it's about building a product, but it's also about building it through a totally new kind of collaborative storytelling. And that leaves us with this really fascinating question to think about. When the audience is the one directing the story, who's the author?